Gianni Infantino, he said that this was the best ever World Cup. Do you think that we might be glossing over things off the pitch because of what happened on the pitch? It was very exciting, but of course there is the other element.
Well, I think it's important that we use moments like this, comments like that, discussions like this one to make sure that doesn't happen, and to make sure that when we evaluate this World Cup, when we talk about legacy, first of all, it's not something we can really do today. I think it's only something we can do in the future. But it's important that we take on board both aspects. The entertainment, the excitement, but at what cost? At what consequence? And I think regardless of how enjoyable this tournament's been, I think because there are continuing to be these discussions, for good and for bad, there will always be a key caveat when people look at the Qatar World Cup. I think this tournament has brought on the table this schism between, for example, people who have the right to love anybody and people who don't have the right to love anybody, and whether that's politics or whether it's a human right. And FIFA hasn't decided, I think, where it stands. And that indecision and the fact that football is this global product brought into a specific environment, it's a tension, a dynamic which hasn't been worked through. And it remains to be seen which direction that goes.
What do you see going forward, Ruben, in terms of FIFA and what decisions they'll make in terms of host nations as a result?
Well, we know that Saudi Arabia is already ready to host it in 2030 with Egypt and Greece all together. So, and apparently they're quite they're favorites to have it. So then we'll have the same discussion again. I think I heard this from Gianni Infantino at every World Cup where he has been. I mean, in Russia it was the same. It was the same story. We cannot deny that there were fantastic stadiums, but at the same time, yeah, at what cost? It says it right. I'm sorry. So yeah, it's such a double feeling when you think about this World Cup with all the things that have been. It's also for the Arab world. It has been a unique World Cup that they could finally host their World Cup. That finally now they could host the world there, and with Morocco doing so well, you can see that for Moroccans and for a lot of people in the Arab world, that has also been a turning point, and maybe let's hope to the good. Yeah, I agree. It remains to be seen where we are heading right now. The first one will be America and Mexico and Canada, when we will have other discussions about why are we going to fly between three countries in an ecological crisis as well. Because, for example, we haven't been talking about this during the tournament. All those fans who were not staying in Qatar because they were not...
160 flights per day in and out of Qatar, is that correct?
And, I mean, there were so many incidents and so many discussions around this World Cup that we even forgot almost about it. And that's, it's important, especially also in these shows where we're sitting right now, that we're still talking about it. And let's please hope they will learn something from it. If it's about FIFA, I tend to, well...
be pessimistic.
A little bit pessimistic.
Let's be honest,
Ruben has always had high praises for, of course, the men at the top of football.
But to follow on what Ruben said, this World Cup was unaffordable for fans. Let's be honest, because accommodation was so expensive there in Qatar. They didn't have enough hostels, for instance. We saw some camps, like provisional camps, and with bad conditions for supporters. And others went to other countries, like neighboring countries, to fly each and every day from one point to another. That's a shame. That's really a shame. And FIFA should have thought about it before the World Cup, before awarding the World Cup to Qatar, because it's like they wake up in the last minute spot, like, oh my God, we won't have enough hostels. How is it possible? Because Qatar is such a small country. It is good because it is a compact World Cup, and then the FIFA could set it by saying, well, see, every stadium is in like a 70-kilometer span, but still. And the other question raised by Ruben about the next World Cup back in 2024, because we'll have to travel from Monterrey to Montreal. 2026, from Monterrey to Montreal, from Guadalajara to Houston to Miami to Toronto. Well, with 48 teams, so even more travels, even more spendings as well. This World Cup, and that's the same debate with the Olympics sometimes. This is just unaffordable for supporters, and we have at some point to think about them, the way they enjoy that competition. People like Argentinians say, well, there were like tons of Arsenal fans there. But look at what happened yesterday or 2 days ago in front of the hostel, because the tickets for the final, the Argentinian FA sold it to like intermediaries, and they put it into another market for like maybe $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 instead of $400 to $600. So that's these are critical points, and we have to think about supporters as well. And in addition to what you said about the workers and all the rights problems.
But I mean, we're talking about supporters, and if it is the correct kind of tournament, the correct prices, of course, you're looking at the minimum of about $200 per night at the accommodation, which is an incredible amount. But one thing which was also touched upon in that report was how this is also potentially the most female-friendly World Cup. Selena Sykes, again in Doha, she can attest to that. She's seen what it's like. She's, of course, covered the Champions League final here in Paris, and she has something to basically compare it against. Selena can't hear me as it stands. We'll come back to her in a second. But I just want to know, because it was held in the Arab world, there are certain laws in place. Ed, do you think that those laws ultimately ended up being beneficial for the crowds that came?
I really don't know, because I wasn't there. I would say that I'm sure there are things that were good and things that were bad. It also depends on the individual. If you're a guy who loves his Budweiser with his football, the laws are probably bad for you. If you're
the alcohol brands,
other alcohol brands are available. If you're someone who has had experience of being harassed by drunk people during a game, then maybe the fact there was no alcohol was a good thing for you. I'm sure there will be people who find themselves on either side of that particular dynamic.
I think that there's also a real frustration in Qatar and also the countries, because it's coming from the West, who is always pointing with their fingers. Because you're talking about the Champions League final. Let's be fair. The Champions League final here in Saint-Denis between Liverpool and Real Madrid was a pure disaster in terms of organization. So it's easy always to point at other people and saying, okay, you're not doing this right, and then, I can understand the frustration, but it's still really important that we are still talking about it, that we're talking about that Champions League final, but also about this tournament, about everything that went well and not went well. It's not black and white.
It's not black and white at all.
Yeah.
And we do have Selena, just a quick one. Selena, she can hear me now. I want to talk about your various experiences at the Champions League final and your experience throughout the tournament in Qatar. How have you felt in terms of your security watching games there, the fans, the general vibe around you and watching the games?
Let me first start with my general experience as a female reporter in football. It is a generally hostile, difficult environment to work in. I've grown up watching football. I've grown up going to stadiums. I had never have found it intimidating to be among mainly male fans in stadiums and at games, even though as a woman it can be a difficult and a hostile and intimidating environment for women who are obviously massively outnumbered by men. As a female reporter, I have had bad experiences at games. You mentioned the Champions League final in Paris. I was inappropriately touched during lives during ahead of that final. It has to be said that here that it has been very calm. There have been no problems whatsoever for me or my other female colleague here with us in Doha. And I think, as you mentioned, I think I heard you discussing it. I think the conclusion has to be the lack of alcohol and the reason that it has been so restricted here in Doha, and that has to be, for me, the conclusion. And it's very much visible that there's a much more family-like atmosphere here in Doha, and I've spoken to, there are many of them, it has to be said, but the female fans you do see here, I think it's a very much the same conclusion from them, that they do in general feel safer and more welcome at these games, and a much more family-like atmosphere. And I do have to think that the conclusion has to be the controlling, the restriction of alcohol.
Well, it's good to hear that you have had this experience, Selena. Karim, you're nodding your head profusely there.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate that FIFA will learn from this and restrict? I mean, to imagine restricting Budweiser in America is going to be something quite
Yeah, and Budweiser
profound.
is an official sponsor of the FIFA, so that's why it's going to be difficult. But to come back on what Selena said, and I was at the final with her sometimes in the Stade de France, so I have some memories from what she told me in those difficult moments. But yeah, that was a safe place. Doha seems to be a safe place, according to what Selena said. And we have to take those lessons, maybe to ban alcohol from stadiums in the next World Cups, because we said that that would be impossible in England or the USA. I don't think so. They can do it. They can ban alcohol. Maybe they will have parties outside, but you can ban alcohol maybe to limit those risks. And to come back on security, yeah, as you said, yeah, the final was like horrific for us, for France, but that was the case also in the Euro 2016 in France, in Marseille, when you had some battles between English and Russian supporters in downtown Marseille before the game. So we have to be better in France and in the Western world sometimes, and without pointing the finger on Qatar, for instance. So that's why I think that we have to take lessons, and the other lesson we should take from that is the police cooperation. Because Qatari authorities, they decided to improve the cooperation between police of every part of the world involved in this World Cup, and we, the Western world and other organizing countries, should do that in the next competition. So to be sure that you will have English policemen, to have Welsh policemen, to have policemen from Argentina, Brazil, and other places in the world inside the country. To be closer to what can happen and to the risks that can be raised in those competitions.
The example of the Russian fans and the English fans in Marseille, to me, that demonstrates why actually it's not the beer in the stadium that's the problem. The supporters who are going to perhaps be abusing alcohol, they're probably not going to be buying the beer in the stadium. I mean, have you seen the prices? They're more likely to be doing it before the game, in the build-up, etc. So I don't know to what extent a alcohol ban just within a stadium or a stadium perimeter is necessarily going to transform behaviour outside the specific context of Doha, where it's a broader context where alcohol is limited.
Yeah, but they tried at the Euros 2016, they tried to ban alcohol even in downtowns. I remember I was at Lens for the England games versus Wales, and they tried to ban alcohol from downtown, but it couldn't work. And on the streets with so many bars like serving alcohol, so either we are serious on that rules or we can let that away or do something else. But
Just
yeah.
to say that it is forbidden, alcohol in French stadiums during a game.
Yes.
During UEFA games in Euro 2016, there was no alcohol in the stadiums, only in the private boxes. So yeah, it's I completely agree with that. The issue is more that where it's all in the whole in the cities, and it's just also a thing of mentality, and that's. You cannot say that there were incidents around the stadiums during this tournament. There were only incidents with supporters because there was political statements. I still want to underline Iran, because that was also an incredible story.
Let's talk about Iran for a second. Of course, we had those incredible acts of defiance, demonstrations. We had the Iranian national team not singing their anthem to join protests to show support rather for protests against the establishment back in Iran. And our reporter, our sports editor, Simon Harding, was in and amongst all of those. He witnessed it firsthand outside, if I'm not mistaken, Al Bayt Stadium. Simon, if you can hear me, in terms of separating politics from football, it's quite a difficult game to play, if you can call it that. But how did you see people making the most of Qatar as a platform to show their grievances back home? It appears that Simon is caught up in the celebration still of those Argentine fans. Just a bit of a problem with the signal. But the same question to you, Ed, as a platform for the World Cup away from football. How important?
Well, first of all, on the point of Iran, I think that we saw even during the Arab Spring the importance of footballers, of sportsmen showing support for a common movement, for a movement that perhaps opposes the state, and how much that can bring or give to people, how much it can swell a movement. So I think that Iran's players ought to be lauded and commended for the bravery they showed. I think almost the relationship between sports, football and politics, it goes back all the way, right the way to the very beginning of time. I don't think it's really realistic to celebrate. I think, as I mentioned earlier, what this tournament has raised up by taking the World Cup to a Muslim country is whether these things are politics or whether they're human rights. And Infantino, ahead of the tournament, he wrote the letter saying we want to stop talking about politics now. Then he gave the press conference, if you remember, where he then focused again on politics. And then issues about such as the armband, for example, or the wearing of rainbow symbolism imagery in stadiums. These are things where the protagonists were saying these are human rights. These aren't politics. You can't almost put them in that box and say these are political issues. These are issues which belong to at the very core of humans, of people, of what it means to belong to humankind. And if on one hand we're celebrating taking a tournament to different heartlands, if we're taking this product, football, to different heartlands, then there has to be, the correct point has to be found in this tension between the differences that exist between people, between cultures.